Today, we're talking about controversy. My own. See, this was inspired by my most recent video where I create myself a whole lot of head trauma. Okay, he's not dead. Oh, no, he's died. But today, we're going to get on with unpopular opinions, and we're going to start with the mildest of spice. And we're going to inject just a little more spice with every single one. And hopefully, something will kick off in the comments section. The first one we have is a universally accepted one, and I will not hear anything about it. It's also what I mentioned in my Crash video. Water levels, out of bounds. Your game has a water level, throw it out the window. If not, I will, and then I'll drown the game. I shall. You can't stop me. So that was the most universally accepted. From there, it's probably just going to get, like, slightly more controversial, to the point where I guess you just get a bit more understanding of me as a gamer, and that's interesting. The next one revolves around this game here. Yes, Assassin's Creed. I'm not going to throw this because it's got the disc in it. Unless Assassin's Creed Unity. What could it possibly be? Well, I think that and Syndicate are delightfully underrated. Now, in fairness, I can understand the allure of the previous older games, but unfortunately they've never managed to capture me like this one does. Maybe it's just because I'm a bit weird and I didn't know that I had a fascination with loot. But hey, I actually really enjoyed getting both of them, which I can't say for the newer games as well. I think there just has to be something about the way that they handled traversal and how, like, it was smaller scale and it had more like themes of, if you don't stealth them first, then you've got no hope, which I guess isn't a theme, more just a thing that happens. But anyway, I think they are underrated to the full extent. I mean, Unity is the closest anyone's ever gotten to actually having multiplayer in Assassin's Creed. I feel like this is the most opinionated thing that's out there, but at the same time, it's one of those opinions that if you hear it from someone else, you go, that's fine. I wouldn't argue against that. But I don't like photorealism in video games. I think, honestly, more artsy games, if that's what you can call it. Art is basically art? Games are basically animated interactive experiences, and although there's still the same thing in the animation industry where photorealism is kind of like the thing you want to aim for, or you want to get as photorealistic but before it goes into the uncanny valley. And that's why I love games that look like this. As much as I dislike Fortnite, mostly because I just don't get it, which we'll come on to later, I prefer that art style to something like Call of Duty. That's more like specific. Right, the next one we have actually has to do with Overwatch, which is fun. I ask you the question, dear viewer, what is the end game of Overwatch? Trick question, there isn't one. To me, the end game in Overwatch is absolutely non-existent. The only thing you can have is have the highest level, which you will never ever have. Like, there's only a top percentage of people that can have that trophy. I mean, Overwatch tried to solve it with, like, having your specific stats and, like, competitive mode. And to me, that's just not something I'm into as a more casual player. The only thing that's replacing that for me is, like, player interaction. And honestly, kind of gets boring after a while, especially since no one wants to have their mic on. So it's not a good deal for me, unfortunately. And I think that goes for a lot of FPS games that are kind of in that genre, especially Call of Duty. It's why I've never really gotten into a Call of Duty. This can also be said for games that give you so little progress, you don't know if you're making progress. Cough, cough, the new Assassin's Creed games. But we're going to move on from this point. Speaking of games where you feel like you make very little progress in a very small amount of time, we've got the Far Cry games. So there are these games here. Now, you might remember these games as being what I call the DLC games. Now, I know what you're thinking, dear viewer. Well, what is a DLC game? Well, it's a game that you'd more likely consider less of its own title and more of a spin-off of a previous game. So think Spider-Man Miles Morales, although I do actually think that deserves to be its own game, considering the second game definitely needed to have that connect. But hey, it is what it is. And then you've got stuff like the pre-sequel for Borderlands, and then you've got, I'm sure I could probably name a few more. You're probably thinking of some now, but honestly, Far Cry, they've had 2 of these, and honestly, I think they've done pretty well. Personally, I think that they've changed up the formula of Far Cry fundamentally in a kind of fun experience that kind of makes sense for it to be its own game. If it worked well, because obviously for these games you have DLC content on top of the game, which makes more sense, because that's kind of how things work. If you can add DLC to a DLC, that makes it feel weird. But if you release it as a DLC type game, which are usually inexpensive or less expensive, about 20 quid's worth English, then that works. And personally, I think Borderlands. Oh Jesus. And personally, I think that these 2 are actually pretty good. I mean, first of all, like automatically, the primal one makes perfect sense. It's cool. It doesn't have guns. You're focused on melee. And honestly, it makes a lot of sense, even though it does use the Far Cry 4 map for some reason. Just couldn't be bothered to make another one. But they gave it a nice, pretty texture, and that's okay. And then the next one is the Far Cry New Dawn, which basically just makes stuff colourful. But they did add a few cool mechanics, in my opinion. The whole kind of post-apocalyptic tone was quite good. It reminded me a slight bit of, even though I haven't played it, Far Cry Blood Dragon, which in itself was a DLC. But at the same time, I can kind of understand it kind of had a good story, kind of, in the same sense as compared to this, which I have no idea what's going on because they're cave people. But anyway, this one is alright. I also had a Snake Man, and he has his own garden now. How delightful. But yeah, there are a few good things in these. I don't think they were completely DLC, although they did have DLC tendencies. But I thought, as far as DLC games go, these are probably the best way to do it. That's my opinion. So here's my penultimate opinion, which is actually speculation, which actually I could research to find out if that's true, and I probably could do a video on if I did that type of content, but I don't. Is actually why LEGO games sort of like fell off, because it's an interesting tale, I feel. Because a lot of people go, oh well, it was better when it was Mumbles. Everything was better when it was Mumbles. Mumbly, 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 bumbly, a dumbly. That's my opinion. But honestly, these games are kind of strange. If you look at the list of ones that do indeed have voice acting, and then you ask yourself, which one is actually good, you'll start to realise, or at least I realised, that it's not specifically because of voice acting. If you look at them, you'll notice that they made some great games with voice acting. I can name 3 right here, and one of them's in my hand. Right, so we have LEGO Marvel Superheroes, the first one. That was great. I loved that one. I think that was a great way of introducing voice acting, the Marvel Universe, and LEGO fun to the games, as well as LEGO Batman 2, and their actual original title, wow, LEGO don't do that often, LEGO City Undercover, are all great games that have their voice acting enhance the LEGO-ness of it. I don't know if there's a LEGO meter, but there should be. However, if you want to consider as well, how many games are just based on films? Like, a lot of games that they made are just based on films, using the same voice acting, which really restricts what they can do on the LEGO side. I mean, sure, they can make cheap jokes from, like, the actual LEGO standpoint, but I think the mumbles probably are what gave it a lot of value. And I think that's why that mumbles for games based on films, brilliant, great. Mumbles based on, like, individual titles, like, imagine if Clutch Powers, imagine if LEGO City Undercover was just mumbles. I don't think it would work as well. And that's why I don't think that necessarily voice acting killed the LEGO games. I just think that movie LEGO games killed LEGO games. And that's just my opinion. My final opinion, honestly, only maybe I care about. The Amazing Spider-Man tie-in games were one hell of a ride that I don't want to come down from. and I don't think you do either. Honestly, they're just so fun, especially since I haven't played a lot of these types of games. If only I had a friend who could give me a history of what these kind of movie tie-in games are really like. And honestly, these games, I feel like kind of switch up the formula. At least the first one does. The first one switches up the formula a lot. The second one is just a weird ride that I absolutely love, and that I will make a video on because I feel like I need to do this. So that is my unpopular opinion, my final one, the one that might spring the most controversy, that there were good Spider-Man games before Spider-Man PS4 that wasn't Shattered Dimensions. Whoa, IGN is shooketh. And with that, that is the end of this video. Uncontroversially, however, I'm going to exit this in the most generic way possible. Subscribe, like the video, it's a controversial thing to do. And that's it for today. Goodbye.
Would just walk over and pick it up, but that wouldn't look as cool.
Okay, that was pretty funny.